Western alienation has always been on people's minds in British Columbia. It's always been talked about feeling alienated. Really, it doesn't matter what happens or how we vote because we're always governed by the number of seats held back in Ontario and Quebec. Right now, we're seeing sentiments and concerns out here that have never been at this level in British Columbia. This is historic. The number of British Columbians wanting BC to leave Canada has grown from 20 to 28% in a little over 1 year.
Speaker, this member is incoherent and consistently racist posturing in this House against Indigenous and First Nations that do in fact have rights and sovereignty in this province. Shame on me.
Stating that sovereignty is somehow a threat to Canadian unity is both untrue and quite frankly racist.
Syd Fizzard for Rebel News coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, where provincial separation from Canada from the Confederation is the talk of the town. The independence movement is picking up steam here in Western Canada following the Liberal Party securing a fourth term in government with their leader, Mark Carney. A deep divide is growing between pragmatic Westerners and the bureaucratic ideologues in Ottawa, whether it be regarding resource management or inadequate representation in our national parliament. Alberta is a hotspot for separation talk, but even in Saskatchewan and British Columbia, people are beginning to ask whether or not it's time for change, seeing as Ottawa hasn't changed one bit.
What I see right now in Saskatchewan is more a feeling of alienation and more a feeling of we just want to be treated fairly. In Confederation.
This is why I'm interviewing independent MLA Dallas Brodie from British Columbia to find out what the sentiment is in that province just across from the mountains behind me to see their opinion on separation.
According to a recent poll, the number of British Columbians wanting BC to leave Canada has grown from 20 to 28% in a little over 1 year. 2 weeks ago, the Premier said that he hates this discussion and that he wants it to stop. These anxieties are real. Mr. Speaker, with the election of Mark Carney, concerns may continue to grow. Will the Premier commit to acknowledging and engaging in meaningful consultation with this growing community about how to restore their hope in the future of this province and in our great country?
I am very excited to work with the new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, for his commitment to all Canadians, that we are going to stand on our own 2 feet, that we will not be apologists to Donald Trump and his 51st state agenda. Because what we're seeing is people who want to flee the United States and come to Canada. We want to welcome them here. We want to stand strong as an independent and sovereign country, and I look forward to working with the Prime Minister and all my colleagues across Canada on that.
My name is Dallas Brodie. I am the MLA for a riding in Vancouver called Vancouver-Quilchena, and I am a newly independent MLA in British Columbia. First of all, Western alienation has always been on people's minds in British Columbia. You know, I've been around for 60 years plus, and it's always been talked about feeling alienated about the structure of our electoral system in Canada, where, you know, we're still voting out here and the results are already in from Eastern Canada. And often we just feel like sort of a bothersome appendage out here in BC. And really, it doesn't matter what happens or how we vote because we're always governed by the number of seats held back in Ontario and Quebec. So what happened is right now we're seeing sentiments and concerns out here that have never been at this level in British Columbia. Right now, a poll was taken in early January. Slightly over 30% of the population now is talking about the idea of separating. This is historic, for sure.
You said that you were looking towards Alberta leadership on this conversation.
We don't ask for special treatment or handouts. We just want to be free.
What's your orientation there? Why did you decide that Alberta's taking the right approach?
We're watching Alberta. We're watching Saskatchewan. We're watching what they're doing. What they're saying is that this structure, this country is not giving that province what it needs anymore. And the reason that resonates out here in BC is because a lot of people here also feel we're not getting much for being in this confederation and within Canada. And so are we separatists? No, but we're saying we need to listen to this growing sentiment that's coming up more and more out here. What's the point of being part of something when you don't feel like your votes matter? And it's particularly accentuated when you see how our province voted, both provincially and federally. So let's take the federal election. First of all, these polls were taken before the federal election. Now that we've got Mark Carney, a federal Liberal, most of British Columbia did not go Liberal. We've got a problem here. And you have to ask, why is this happening? And what are we going to do about it? What we see Alberta doing is laying down some demands, saying if we want to stay here, we need some needs met for our province, for the health of our economy, and we need to see that. Otherwise, what's the point? We can't just be a cookie jar for the eastern provinces. There has to be something in it for the people living in these provinces, and I think British Columbia feels the same way now. I mean, looking at the numbers.
What's unique about BC's separation? What needs specifically to British Columbia aren't being met?
Well, I think that it was reflected in the provincial election as well. The problems in BC right now are that we have a resource-based economy, and we built our economy based on mining, fishing, forestry, and then tourism throughout the, huge amounts of BC. And those areas are not voting Liberal or NDP right now. They're voting Conservative. They want smaller government, lower taxes. They want faster response, less regulation. And, we've got things impacting us here that need to be looked at. Now, if I can jump into that about what the problems we see that I see is that, first of all, we laid out three things to David Eby, which these are the things that got him so upset. The first one is the influence of the Chinese Communist Party in BC. We are being hit with billions of dollars of tariffs from China, and nobody even talks about it. We also have political interference from China, and this is not okay. And people notice it, and they're aware of it, and they want to talk about it. We have fentanyl flooding through our streets. And this is raised by the United States too. Like, you've got to stop the flow of fentanyl. And the research shows that it's coming from China. That's a big problem. It's destroying a lot of northern towns. The second issue we have is that we have over 200 First Nations bands declaring sovereignty over not just their immediate territory, or their immediate reserve land. It's over their territory that they say is their traditional territory. And this is a problem because, 204 bands all expressing sovereignty rights and saying things like, we're not part of Canada. We don't have to abide by Canadian laws or BC laws. That's a problem. And then the third one is we've been overwhelmed by very powerful US-funded environmentalist groups that have come up here and stirred the pot and created all of this push to really shut down industry in British Columbia. If I were a betting person, I'd say they want to shut down BC so that oil from Alberta can't get to the ocean. So if you block anything going through BC, you've shut down Alberta as well, at least from it taking tar sands oil or whatever it is to the Pacific Ocean.
There seems to be a bit of irony here, where if you're a Native American and you suggest a pathway of reconciliation or secession along those lines, this is our land, as you mentioned, they seem to be getting a lot of funding. There's no negative criticism in the media. But when you've got, let's call it the other people that are in these provinces that are saying the same things in line of, we're done with the federal government. We seek to have a better life for ourselves and to improve our quality of life outside of this other jurisdiction. They get the hammer. They get heavily criticized, called radicals and extremists.
Well, I've actually been called a racist. I was, apparently, if you express any concern now about the sovereigntist movement by 204 bands in BC, you are a racist. It was just said again in the legislature today.
The dehumanization of Indigenous peoples empowers others to engage in physical and emotional violence against us. For instance, stating that sovereignty is somehow a threat to Canadian unity is both untrue and, quite frankly, racist.
It's incredible. People are legitimately concerned about the future of BC's economy. One measurement I can give you, for example, is that in Chile, from start to finish, if you go down there and want to open a mine, from start until time you're digging, it's 2 years. In British Columbia, it's on average 12 to 15 years. Okay? That's because there's so much duplication for environmental assessments and then Indigenous consultation that it just goes on. And then at the very end, it can just get canceled anyway. So according to John Rustad, during the campaign that we just went through it provincially, there are 17 stalled mines in BC. 17. And apparently there aren't any on deck waiting. And so that's a problem. I'm not saying it can't be fixed, but we need to look at this and ask ourselves, what are we doing here? You know, how are we going to move ahead?
This report is brought to you by
Canadians know the national anthem. They stand in silence to remember those who died for this country. But not every Canadian knows their rights and freedoms. The Freedom Passport will change that. It looks and feels like a Canadian passport, but contains the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in a portable, easy-to-read format. The Freedom Passport. Order one for yourself and for all the freedom lovers that you love at freedompassport.ca.
The Premier says he supports Team Canada, but has done nothing to address the greatest threats to our unity. Political interference by the Chinese Communist Party, the fragmentation of BC by over 200 bands, each asserting its own sovereignty, and the strangulation of our economy by powerful US-funded environmental groups and other hostile powers that are active in BC. British Columbians are losing hope, Mr. Speaker, and so I ask again, will the Premier engage in meaningful consultation with this critical group of people in British Columbia?
Premier. Speaker, this member's incoherent and consistently racist posturing in this House against Indigenous and First Nations that do in fact have rights and sovereignty in this province. Shame on me. Honourable Speaker, her promotion of residential schools denial, her denial of the sovereignty of First Nations and the rights of First Nations in this province continues now. It is disgusting and appalling. It advances us not 1 degree in growing our economy, in ensuring we're working with First Nations. What it does do is it drives wedges. It reduces our growth. It reduces our prosperity. It hurts people in real ways, making sure that jobs are not available. And so I ask the member to refrain from her hateful rhetoric, to step back and reflect on the impact of her very real words as a leader in the community. It is disgraceful. And I understand why people in her community have put up signs that say she is not my MLA.
Separation, it seems to be something of it seems to be dividing in our dialogue. But would you suggest, or I'll suggest it, I'm going to ask if you agree, do you think that separation could actually be a unifying force between a lot of these conservatives who want a better deal from Ottawa alongside the Native American groups that also want a better deal? Do you think this is something that could actually bring these two groups together?
That's actually a great thought, and I think it would be great if it could unify, because I've heard some First Nations in Manitoba are saying, "Oh no, you can't separate. We love Canada and we like the Crown and we have deals with Canada and with the Crown." And I thought, well, that's interesting. I thought you hated Canada and the Crown. So now it's like, oh no, we have a deal with the Crown and with Canada, and we're not going to let go of those deals. Understandably, but so maybe this is a unifying time to say, okay, good. So we all need to work together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. We all have to work together, because at the end, the problem is we've created two different groups in society. We need to say we are all British Columbians. We are all Canadians. We can't have two classes of society. That's my view. We can't have two classes of society. It's not going to work. It's not working it won't work from a justice standpoint. It won't work from an economic standpoint. And I would hope that this may bring us together. That would be a terrific thing, actually, because we can do much more together than fighting amongst ourselves. And even some First Nations are fighting amongst themselves now. The Supreme Court of Canada is now stepping in to solve a land claim where three different nations are claiming against each other. I don't know if you've heard about that. But in BC, there are three nations all claiming the same land. So the Supreme Court of Canada has agreed to step into this. So you can see the difficulties ahead if these kinds of things continue.
The final word, if there's anything you want to add to this conversation.
I think that we need to listen to people when they're saying that we are very concerned about the future of British Columbia. We can't just do what David Eby said, is to just shut up, stop talking about it. It's a tired old trope, and I don't want to hear it. That's not going to work. People are talking about it. And so we need to engage and hear what the concerns are and then take steps to address those concerns.
Time will tell where the separation movement is headed, but one thing is for certain, many Western Canadians have finally had enough of the federal government and are seriously considering moves towards further independence. Let us know in the comments, do you think there is a good reason to stay in Confederation, or is it time to take our future into our own hands? For Rebel News, I'm Syd Fizzard. DoneGettingScrewed.com is where you have to go if you want to see the latest on Alberta and the West's separation movement. Stay informed and see what Canada might look like in the years ahead by following us at DoneGettingScrewed.com.